Good evening.
Howdy.
Hey there. Hi, Price.
How
Hey,
you
Daniel.
doing?
Good, good. How are you all doing?
Yeah,
Doing
pretty
pretty
good.
well.
Excellent. Thanks for your timeliness.
Hey everybody, Nick Dodge here, Michigan LCV. You should be able to turn your cameras on now, if you so choose to.
Right.
Yeah, so we're just going to give, we'll just give a few more minutes for the Congresswoman to join, as well as Commissioner Nash. We did hear from Commissioner Nash a little bit ago that he might be dealing with some, commuting issues, or just might be a little late. So we're just prepared for that. And then also we expect the Congresswoman probably in just a few minutes. She wasn't going to be able to join right at 6:45. So mainly this is, I think mainly this is to make sure, as I said, the audio is all working out, which it is for you all. The video looks good for both of you. We can run through the run of show, maybe give it a couple minutes just to let others join, and we can run through the run of show and stuff like that. But while we're waiting, anything like kind of on top of mind for you all, or any questions, concerns, that sort of thing?
No.
I mean, thanks for sending the step ahead of time. That was really helpful. Help me cut a few things. So I've tried to keep it as close to 5 minutes as I can, while still hitting the key points. But yeah, that was really helpful. And it looks like a lot of the sort of the bigger issues the Congresswoman's going to take off the top. So that's also super helpful.
Yeah, and I suppose the benefit of going after the Congresswoman is, you can see what she talks about a little bit and adjust accordingly. And of course, we also have, a good part of this as the Q&A. We set a decent amount of time for that, to anticipate any remarks going a little long. One thing that you'll notice in the run of show, we do have a couple video questions that Lisa, our moderator, will kick off. So there'll be a video question we'll play. We'll play the video. They're both aimed at Congresswoman Slotkin, but others are welcome to jump in too. And then once the kind of answer for that first question is over with, then the next question will go answer, and then after that we'll just kind of open it up in kind of a regular webinar Q&A, where all the questions and answers will be either submitted through the Q&A function, and you see that down there. You don't have to worry about it because we'll monitor, and we'll kind of grab the questions that we deem most appropriate or relevant to the conversation, feed them to Lisa, and then Lisa will kind of tee them up, usually direct them toward one panelist, but some of the questions multiple panelists could answer. So and then also this is being streamed live on Facebook Live, and so we also take questions through the comments that way too. So we'll have a staffer monitoring the Facebook Live. I'm getting a call in now that it's possible it's Commissioner Nash, so I'm just going to take it real quick.
Hey Price.
Yeah.
Quick tip for you if you're interested. Not essential, but if you one of the things we kind of offer to a lot of, or suggest to a lot of speakers on these, is if you want to find like some books or something. It looks like you're on a laptop. Put some books like on your laptop, just to elevate it a little bit to make it so the camera is at your eye level. It kind of it just sort of helps with you know, make you look, you know, like you're looking right at the audience, as opposed to kind of audience looking up at you. Like I said, not 100% essential. I think you'll do fine if you're not able to finagle that, but just a quick suggestion.
Well, I appreciate that because I need all the help I can get to look halfway decent. So give me 1 second.
And if it stops you from being able to like actually use your computer if you needed to or anything like that, like, but yeah, I would just recommend like maybe like I don't know, like I'm not really sure what desk setup is like, but maybe like usually like 2 to 3 thick books or binders or whatever, and just put your laptop on it and get that camera right at eye level.
I'm using a couple of board game boxes myself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's a lot of different things. So
There's that one photo of, I can't remember her name, but she's the scientist with Union of Concerned Scientists, and she did a interview on CNN, and her husband took a picture of her while she was doing the interview, and she's got this like elaborate setup of the laptop setting on a coffee table, on a chair on the coffee table with books on the chair, and then like the whole floor is covered with, you know, kids' toys just during the pandemic.
yeah,
I thought that was pretty brilliant.
pretty amazing what folks have figured out. Hey Lisa, how are you?
Thanks everybody for doing this tonight. And Price, I need to actually ask you how to pronounce your last name so I don't mess it up, because you know my last name's Wozniak and it comes in all different pronunciations, but tell me your pronunciation.
It's Dobrnik.
Dobrnik.
Dobrnik. Yep.
Dobrnik. Okay, awesome. I was doing that and then I was like, no, maybe it's Dobrnik. No,
No,
Dobrnik.
no,
Okay.
just like it looks, Dobrnik.
I think that's a lot better, Price, by the way.
Yeah,
Looks like you
it
stacked
is.
up a little
Thank you. I
bit.
appreciate the tip. I'm going to remember this.
Yep, no problem.
And that was Commissioner Nash. He's logging on now. Just wanted to clear up the link, so I made sure he has the correct link and will be joining. And then I see Congresswoman Slotkin's staffer, Austin, has joined us here in the green room, and I think he's just planning to stay behind the scenes and be ready to kind of respond. He's the policy expert on a lot of these issues, so kind of ready to respond behind the scenes if needed. Hey Austin, how you doing?
Hey everyone, thank you guys for putting this together.
Hey, Austin, how you doing?
Good to see you, Price.
Good to see you. Well, good to hear you.
There you go.
There you are.
All right, well,
Hey Bentley, before we go any further, can I just quickly do a quick test for my screen sharing and stuff, just to make sure audio and video is coming through all right, for the prepared kind of video questions? Just bear with me for a moment here.
So we're still going forward with the 2 video questions first for the Congresswoman before we go into the audience questions. Okay.
correct, that's the plan.
Yes. Let me know if this sounds all right.
Michigan is home for the big 3. More car companies are going 100%.
Did that sound okay? Can you see it and everything?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. So
Yeah, so go ahead.
I would just say, you know, the weather right now in mid-Michigan especially is a little shaky. And so, you know, just kind of to be aware. I think we're broadcasting and hosting it from Ypsilanti. And so I think we're going to miss the hardest or the most severe of it. But, you know, things can happen where internet goes out and stuff. And so I guess I would just say to Lisa, you know, we have our run of show and everything. And so, you know, if someone kind of goes dark, probably be best to just kind of keep the program rolling to the next one and give them some time to reconnect if they are able to. Hopefully
Nick,
it doesn't happen, but
It is very timely that you mentioned that, because in Holly they did not miss the worst of it, and they Congresswoman actually had a power outage earlier, so as you will see, she is joining by phone.
And Nick, we've lost power a couple times here in Lansing in the last hour or two on the south side, so keep our fingers crossed.
Evening, everyone. Howdy.
Hi.
Hey
Never,
there.
Congresswoman.
never a dull moment.
Yeah, I am coming to you on my phone in the dark. So we'll see
If
how.
that's our only challenge tonight, I guess that's good, but you know, you never know.
Yeah.
It's a good
And,
opportunity to talk about grid resilience.
right.
Yeah.
And yeah, and as I mentioned, Commissioner Nash is also dealing just with some tech issues, but is expected to join here shortly. But I think what we'll do is just quickly go through the run of show one more time for everybody, and then we'll be getting close to starting. But Nick Dodge will be handling, all the tech side, and he just tested out the video and audio. Looks good for the couple of video questions that we have. But we'll go live at 7 p.m. Lisa will give an introduction and mention our partners and co-hosts. As you'll remember, Lisa, it's on Facebook Live, so just give a moment to pause and kind of let that catch up. Then Lisa will introduce Congresswoman Slotkin. Congresswoman, we have you set aside for about 7 minutes of remarks. And then Lisa will then go into introducing Commissioner Jim Nash, and Jim Nash will speak for about 5 minutes. After that, Lisa will introduce Price, again, 5-minute remarks. And last but not least, Lisa will introduce Daniel Brown, 5 minutes. And then we'll begin the Q&A session with those 2 video questions submitted from Mom's Clean Air Force from actual constituents. And then we'll do the traditional Q&A with questions submitted through the Q&A function in the webinar, as well as Facebook Live comments. And then finally, Lisa will end the Q&A and wrap up 5 minutes to 8 with a call to volunteer and we'll have like a survey through the webinar for people that want to sign up and volunteer. Any questions as we head into this? And if Commissioner Nash is unable to join, we'll just go right to you, Price, after the Congresswoman.
It's all pretty straightforward. I think that just so everybody knows, our awesome team will be sort of filtering the questions. We're not going to get any crazy questions out here. We're gonna make sure they're all questions that take us in the right direction. So yeah, so big thanks to Bentley and Nick for all of that prep and what you're going to be doing in the next couple minutes. So
last thing I would say actually is it's our recommendation that you just during the remarks section, just keep your video off until it's kind of your turn to be introduced. And then you can pop your video on, stay mute until you're ready to talk, and then unmute and go ahead and give your remarks. And then once you're done with your remarks, feel free to turn off the video. And then once we get to the Q&A session, everyone turn their video on, and Lisa will be at times directing individual questions to individual panelists, sometimes to the entire panel, depending on the question. But I would just be ready to jump in and kind of have also just kind of a discussion, and you can jump in if you have a thought to share and that sort of thing.
And yeah, so we're at 7 o'clock now, and I will keep time and stuff, and I have the run of show in front of me, and I'll just put in the chat to you all, time check here when you're at kind of just to keep us on schedule with the program and everything, and just so you're aware of like the time is and stuff. And so now that we are at 7 o'clock, I am going to initiate the webinar and start the live stream here. So just give me a moment. I'll let you know when we're live. So we're going to go live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us via Zoom and Facebook Live for the latest episode of People, Planet, Public Health. It's our webinar series. My name is Lisa Wozniak, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, and we're very honored that you've chosen to spend your time with us this evening. I'd like to give a special note of thanks to our co-hosts for this event and our partners, the Michigan Sierra Club, the Green Door Initiative, Moms Clean Air Force, Blue Green Alliance, AFL-CIO, UA Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, the Huron River Watershed Council, the People's Water Board Coalition, Environmental Defense Fund, and Detroit Action. We launched this webinar series in 2020 as a way to keep our members and the public engaged on a whole host of key issues in an all virtual setting throughout the pandemic. Since launching last year, we've held dozens of these webinars, and we've engaged literally thousands of viewers through Zoom and Facebook Live, holding discussions on timely issues around our air, our land, water, public health, and our democracy. In recent months, we've hosted discussions about voting rights and the anti-voter legislation moving through Lansing, discussions about water contamination like lead and PFAS, and most recently, a discussion about President Biden's American Jobs Plan. We're happy to keep this series going, and most importantly, we're very, very happy to have you with us here this evening as we discuss an issue that is near and dear to many of us across the state: federal opportunities to protect our water, to act on climate, and to build a clean energy future. As we work to recover from COVID-19, because we're still doing that, we're recovering from that brutal pandemic, Michigan and the rest of the country has an immense opportunity to build our country back in a manner that takes real, necessary action on climate change, upgrades our water infrastructure, and builds a resilient, clean economy that works for everyone. And Michigan, this great state of ours, has the opportunity, because we sit at the center of this change, we have the opportunity to lead with our manufacturing know-how, our world-renowned auto industry, and our deep, deep connection to fresh water. It literally surrounds us and defines us. Over the summer, major infrastructure investments have been a critical focus. Working with partner organizations, key elected officials who can facilitate action on climate change and infrastructure in Washington, and our partners at the federal level, we've been hard at work to make sure that we capitalize on the opportunity to address the climate crisis and to protect drinking water while simultaneously, and very importantly, creating thousands of good paying jobs that will help Michigan communities recover from COVID-19 and bolster our economy. Tonight, you'll be hearing directly from some of the key players in an effort to get investments for water and clean energy infrastructure across the finish line. You'll hear about efforts at the federal level to capitalize on opportunities in front of us, as well as what those investments in our infrastructure will mean for those of us in Michigan. And you'll also hear from those directly who will directly benefit from the creation of good paying union jobs as we move towards a clean energy future. This evening's speakers are Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, representing Michigan's 8th Congressional District, Jim Nash, Oakland County Water Resources Commissioner, Price Dobernick, President of the Michigan Pipe Trades Association and Business Manager for UA Local 333 Plumbers, Pipe Fitters, and HVAC Mechanics, and Daniel Brown from the Huron River Watershed Council. Before we dive into the program, I want to bring your attention to the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There will be time for questions from the audience. So please use that Q&A function to submit your questions. We'll answer as many of the questions that we receive as we can in the second half of this program. And for those of you tuning in on Facebook Live, we have staff monitoring the comments in the events section, comment section. So please put your questions in the comment section and we'll monitor those too and try to get those answered. And finally, you'll be seeing a survey question or two pop up along the way during our program about signing up for future events and ways to get involved. If you're interested in volunteering with Michigan LCV or getting involved, I encourage you to respond yes. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin. Congresswoman Slotkin, as I mentioned, represents Michigan's 8th Congressional District, which stretches from northern Oakland County all the way west to Lansing. Since taking office in 2018, Congresswoman Slotkin has been a fierce advocate, a really fierce advocate for environmental protection and sustainability, fighting in Washington to tackle the toxic PFAS chemicals in our waters, working for safe, clean, accessible drinking water, and investing in a clean energy future. Michigan is really lucky to have environmental champions like Congresswoman Slotkin representing us in our nation's capital. With that, welcome to this Zoom, and thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman.
Thanks for having me. Thanks to Lisa and LCV. LCV is really just the absolute vanguard of environmental issues around the country and certainly in the state of Michigan. And so I'm really thrilled to be here, especially with Jim and Price and Daniel to talk about issues that we all care about so deeply. I think we're having this conversation about what we can do at the federal level and what it will mean at the local level. We're having the conversation at the right time because we are having a pretty serious, intense conversation about a once in a generation infrastructure package that we're going to be looking at seriously and voting on here probably in the next month. And the overlap between the infrastructure issues and the environmental issues that I know LCV is so focused on are really, it's a really significant overlap. And when I think about environmental issues in general, I tend to frame it based on my background. I'm a former CIA officer and Pentagon official. My husband was 30 years in the Army. My stepkids are in service in various ways. So that's my sort of approach to this problem set, which is I really think of environmental security as homeland security, because it is quite literally about the safety of our kids and the preservation of our way of life. You know, if you can't hand your child a glass of water because you're not sure if it's got lead in it or PFAS in it or what in it that's going to give them a lifelong disability, you know, that is a threat to your family, much more present and much more real than a lot of the threats coming from, you know, global superpowers halfway across the world. And, you know, if you can't fish the rivers that you learned to fish in, that your grandparents fished in, because there's a do not eat, you know, fish warning, that's a threat to your way of life. You know, we all live here because we love our rivers, our lakes, our streams, our watersheds, our environments. So I tend to think of it as pure homeland security, and that affects how I approach the various issues at the federal level. So we know that whether it comes to PFAS or cleaning up lead in Flint, that we have to, I think, take environmental issues out of this sort of niche corner that some people like to put it in, and really talk about it and with people who might not necessarily consider themselves environmentalists. We need new allies and new partners. And that's what we're trying to do in part through the infrastructure package that we're discussing right now in Washington. Like I said, this is really going to be a rare opportunity. In our lifetime, we haven't seen this kind of significant reinvestment in our infrastructure. It precedes most of us living, and most of us will never see this kind of investment again. And it's overdue. We know that from just driving down the street in Michigan. But the package that we're considering right now is going to do things like put our tradesmen to work, rebuild our roads, our bridges, our dams, our tunnels, our airports, for other places, ports. It's going to replace and improve our water infrastructure. This is one that I think about all the time. The number of communities in the state of Michigan who know they need major repairs and upgrades to their water systems, who simply cannot do it because they don't have the funds, because it requires a lump sum that small community may not have. And then making sure we can secure the planet's clean future with things like clean energy. Michigan in particular has a really important role to play in technology that helps secure the planet's future, especially when it comes to things like electric vehicles. You know, we know that we are the auto state, and we want to lead the world, not just in the combustion engine vehicles, but in electric vehicles. I happen to represent the GM plant in Lake Orion that makes the Chevy Bolt, the all electric. And it's a great example of investing in our manufacturing, investing in a technology that's cleaner, but still maintaining our kind of corner on the market here in the United States and in Michigan in particular. So, the president struck a deal, a bipartisan deal. This has been all over the news, that will provide billions for electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure. That includes research and development on things like charging infrastructure, batteries, how to make them smaller and more efficient. We all know, I was just with President Biden when we met at the Ford plant in Dearborn to unveil the Ford F-150 Lightning, the all-electric Ford F-150. Never thought I'd see it in my life. And it's a pretty incredible vehicle, what this thing can do. But we know that if we do not have charging stations up and down I-75 so that people can go up north on the weekends with that same truck, that people aren't going to buy that thing. So it's not just about making the vehicles, which of course we want to be the leader on. It's about having the infrastructure to do that. And the bill that we're considering right now really kind of supercharges, no pun intended, our electric infrastructure across the country. We want to be able to drive across the country, multiple routes, and not have that range anxiety that a lot of people have about, purchasing an electric vehicle. And the bill that we're considering will play a critical role in that. The electric vehicle issue is a perfect example of how we can tackle dual goals of dealing with things like climate change, but also ensuring that we have clean, affordable transportation made in Michigan, manufactured in Michigan. This idea, this false choice between caring about manufacturing and caring about the environment, I reject that false choice. And I think we're trying to make that point very, very clearly by putting serious money behind it in the infrastructure package. The bill also that we're considering also allocates billions for water and sewage infrastructure improvements that will make communities, it'll be like just a revolution for some of the communities. I live in Holly, but places like Flint and Detroit, small communities that have never really had proper sewage will now have the opportunity to apply to their county and get money to put in a proper sewage system. This is really big deal in a place like North Oakland County that I represent, where we can't attract new businesses to our downtowns because they don't have proper sewage. At the end of the day, the goal is to be good for business, it's to be good for our workers and good for the environment. And I think the way that those issues are intertwined is just an important factor that is being reflected in the legislation that we're debating. So our goal, and I keep watching the news myself, is that we will have bill text to look at in the next 2 weeks. We have been told that we are not leaving for August, our August break until we vote on an infrastructure bill, get it through the House and the Senate, and have the president sign it. So it's really going to happen in the near term. It's a perfect moment for us to be having this conversation. Thank you to LCV and Lisa for having me. Thanks for my fellow panelists for having this conversation and for everyone watching. And I'm ready to hand it over to Jim Nash.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I know there's going to be a number of questions for you. I appreciate your comments tremendously. I would like to introduce Jim Nash, Oakland County Water Resources Commissioner, as our next speaker. As Water Resources Commissioner, Jim oversees the planning, development, and maintenance of water systems in Oakland County. And as Oakland County has emerged as a leader in tackling issues relating to sustainability and water quality, Jim and his team are at the forefront of efforts to protect our water and save energy through infrastructure investments, as well as tackling a big problem, which is water affordability, which has become a crisis in our state. With the unique opportunity to transition to a clean energy future in front of us, the work that Jim and Oakland County are doing is incredibly important. So we're delighted to have you with us this evening, Jim. I'm turning things over to you. You're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. I really appreciate that introduction. it's an honor to be with Representative Slotkin, and I really appreciate LCV, what you do every day. So I really appreciate being invited here. You know, you mentioned affordability. I mean, to me, that's one of the major things that we need to pay attention to as we're developing all our policies for a sustainable future. Climate change is bringing massive changes to us. I'm sitting in my home right now without power, with a bunch of branches in my front yard, trees all Farmington through. This is what we're going to be dealing with more every year as the science is telling us. This first chance in literally decades to fund the infrastructure, the United States taught the world how to build mega infrastructure, from the Panama Canal to the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Hoover Dam. Some of those things have fallen into disrepair. More than 2/3 of their system is 80
Jim, we're
years
having
old.
a hard time hearing you.
All their underground systems. So there's communities that
I am afraid that we are losing Jim in his connectivity due to the storms. I would love an affirmation from one of my teammates that it is not just I that has lost the connection. Okay. All right, so I think we're going to just have to move on, and it's a real shame because Jim has so much to share with us. So maybe he'll pop back up and we'll be able to continue in this all virtual environment that we have learned to live in. But we have a great panel, and I'm really pleased to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Price Dobernik, President of the Michigan Pipe Trades Association and Business Manager of UA Local 333, Plumbers, Pipe Fitters, and HVAC Mechanics. And as we work to capitalize on all the opportunities in front of us that we've heard the Congresswoman talk about, that I've mentioned a little bit, and Jim was trying to talk about as well, addressing the climate crisis, investments in Michigan's clean energy, transportation, and water infrastructure, all of that will be essential to achieving these goals. And the investments will mean construction and replacement projects that will improve efficiency and reliability and create thousands of good paying union jobs across our state. So the plumbers and pipe fitters are one of many strong unions in Michigan that will be at the forefront and are at the forefront of strengthening both our state's economic resilience and ability to adapt to climate fueled changes, like the stronger storms we're experiencing, like right now and last week, and the flooding. So thank you for joining us this evening. Price, you have the floor.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lisa. And it's unfortunate that Jim had a bad connection. I was really enjoying his opening remarks, and hopefully we can get him back on. So again, thank you, Lisa. Good evening to all. First, I want to thank LCV for the opportunity to join the discussion this evening. Been looking forward to it all day. And I also want to recognize and thank Congresswoman Slotkin for her hard work and dedication to not only my members of the United Association, but to all the workers across the state of Michigan, whether they're with the UA or not. She's certainly an advocate for all workers, and she certainly has a strong commitment to our environment as shown here tonight. So Congresswoman Slotkin, thank you. As stated earlier, I am the business manager from Local 333 in Lansing, but I'm joining the conversation this evening as the president of the Michigan Pipe Trades Association. I have the honor of representing 12 different local unions across the state of Michigan. I wanted to make sure I mentioned 3 of them, and that's Local 636, which is the pipe fitters out of Detroit, Local 98, the plumbers union out of Detroit, and the sprinkler fitters, Local 704 out of Detroit as well. They all cover Oakland County, and if I get any questions tonight that I can't handle, I'll certainly be reaching out to them, but they do a great job and they're advocates across their entire jurisdiction, including Oakland County. So I wanted to make sure I gave them a plug. As mentioned earlier, we are at a pivotal moment as we recover from COVID-19, and we certainly have an excellent opportunity to build back better and to do it in a responsible manner. The United Association has been working for many years and has been at the forefront of installing green technologies, and we not only install them, we maintain them, and we replace them as the technology advances and the products get better and more effective. So we're looking forward to the future of new equipment and new processes that are becoming, they'll be coming forward, and we look forward to installing those systems and advocating for such policies that would support them. Many members of the United Association are also licensed plumbers here in Michigan. And to that end, safe drinking water and proper disposal of both sanitary and storm waste is certainly a priority of my membership. It's what we do every day. We're on the forefront in Flint. You know, everybody remembers Flint. And I know for me personally, that was something that changed me directly, because I went down there along with my members many times and volunteered, and hearing it on the news and seeing it are two different things. And I think it's very important to get out in front where we can and prevent situations like that and not react to them after they've happened. So I know for me personally, that was a turning point. So we look forward to future conversations, but at the end of the day, when it comes time to put a formal plan together, you know, we need the following things in place, if possible, to protect, to protect both Michigan workers as well as their employers. And four of the major items that I wanted to mention tonight that'll be important for both groups is whatever policies move forward, we want to make sure that Davis-Bacon wage requirements are a part of them. We'd like to see local hiring language put in place. We'd like to see DOL registered apprenticeship programs recognized, as well as some responsible contractor language put in with the policy. Excuse me, apologize for that. All four of those things are big and important to making sure that this investment not only moves us in the right direction with our environment, but also provides good paying jobs for people across the state of Michigan. So we'll continue our progress at the UA on training the next generation of plumbers and pipe fitters, as well as welders and HVAC technicians, along with our sprinkler fitters. And when we're doing that, I wanted to make sure I mentioned, you know, we put a heavy emphasis on recruitment in the minority population. We feel that anybody and everybody who wants to be a part of our organization and learn our skills has that opportunity regardless of their zip code or race. So we're looking forward to the opportunity to participate tonight and to participate in future conversations and to advocate for workers across the state, whether they're UA or other building trades. As mentioned earlier by Lisa, there's certainly a lot of trades above and beyond the UA that will play a role in this, and we're looking forward to it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Lisa.
Thank you very much, Price. And I bet there's going to be a bunch of questions for you too. So we have one last speaker, unless Jim, miraculously comes through again. But it seems like that storm is pretty bad in Oakland County. So I'd now like to introduce Daniel Brown. Daniel is the watershed manager at the Huron River Watershed Council, an organization dedicated to the health and protection of, as I like to say, the mighty Huron River. As watershed manager, Daniel works to revitalize the river's watershed and focuses on addressing serious challenges, like some of the ones we're talking about here tonight: climate change impacts and toxic PFAS contamination. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. And, you know, as others have thanked the Congresswoman before me, I'd like to extend my thanks as well, particularly for your leadership on addressing PFAS, which of course has affected the Huron River directly, and we're still dealing with the impacts of PFAS on the Huron River. So thank you for all your effort, really to understand that problem deeply and to try to find, you know, really pragmatic ways to address that issue. I really appreciate it. In southern Michigan and in the Huron River watershed, when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about water. That means we're talking about water infrastructure. That means we're talking about land protection. One thing I really want to effort is that our water resources are all interconnected. So the better we manage runoff or wastewater, or the better we protect waterways, that makes our drinking water more secure. It makes our recreation water safer, and et cetera. And when we look at the hard reality of the climate data, we see our total annual precipitation has increased pretty dramatically. But more importantly, we see that our heaviest storms are becoming stronger, they're becoming more frequent, and that change is actually outpacing the change in the average. So we're getting more of our precipitation in these big damaging gulps rather than a lot of these smaller sips. So storms like the one that flooded Detroit just recently, or storms like the ones that broke the dams on the Tittabawassee River, these catastrophic level events, these once in a century events, these once in 500-year events, that type of storm, when we look at the climate projections, could occur multiple times in a decade by the end of the century. And that's not even looking at the worst case scenario. That's looking at a moderate amount of warming by 2100. And the end of the century seems far away, but when we're talking about infrastructure, infrastructure has a long lifetime. So remember, that means that the large infrastructure projects that we're thinking about right now, that we're designing, that we're implementing right now, those projects are going to face that climate change risk directly once they're implemented and within their lifetime. On top of all of that, much of our existing infrastructure is already old and failing. And as we look across much of Michigan, it's extremely vulnerable to climate change, but it was built using data that was already obsolete at the time that the infrastructure was put in place, let alone it certainly didn't consider any future climate changes when they were implementing that. So we're already extremely vulnerable without even considering about what's coming next. And in this case, dams are of a particular concern. Most dams in Michigan are in pretty rough shape. Most are well beyond their design lifetime. So when it's appropriate, HRWC finds that removing dams is good for rivers, it's good for over ecological health, reduce costs to the communities, and it certainly reduces risk to anyone nearby. But more broadly, what do we do? What do we do about all this infrastructure that's out there, about these changes that are coming, these big global changes that are coming? Well, we really have this incomplete mindset that for many decades has been focused on static solutions. So in the past, we've been good about identifying an infrastructure problem, contracting with an engineer, going out there, fixing the problem. Typically has been with a static one-off solution. Build a bigger drain pipe, a higher seawall, put in a stronger dam. But climate change is continual, and it means that we'll have to continually reconsider designs, practices, risks. So we can no longer think about infrastructure as this really permanent thing with this one-time solution. There's no new climate normal that we're building toward to solve. There's only a next normal and then one after that. It'll be this iterative process for the foreseeable future. So with all of that in mind, what we really need are these dynamic alternative solutions. It's beyond installing bigger drain pipes. We have to keep water out of the storm pipes to begin with. We need to reduce water use. We have to reduce runoff. The good news is that we can do all of that with green infrastructure, land protection, smart development. The short of it is that we need to give nature the space it needs to adapt to climate change effects. And a short way of saying it is that we protect the ecosystem, it protects us. There are a lot of other co-benefits to pursuing these alternative green infrastructure solutions. A few of them, they attenuate risks from other types of pollution like PFAS. They reduce stress on built infrastructure. They give nearby residents sort of a protective shield when things go wrong, when pollution gets into the system or when a dam fails. And, they also just protect the natural character of, rural areas, of wild spaces. And we have a lot of those in the 8th district. We have a lot of those types of spaces in the Huron River watershed across Michigan. And really protecting those, outdoor recreation and tourism assets, there's a lot of value in protecting those. So the Huron River alone is roughly equivalent in economic value to a Big Ten home football season. So we consider, what the value of other assets across Michigan would be. It would be quite large, and green infrastructure, natural infrastructure can certainly help with that. One criticism we often hear is, the cost of incorporating climate change. And quite simply, the cost of inaction is just so much higher than the cost of climate action. It's really not even close. The Trust for Public Land found that every dollar we spend on green infrastructure returns about $4 in savings. The Huron River Watershed Council, just one last thing I want to mention. We run a program called Changemakers, and the goal of that program is to get thoughtful people engaged at the local level around policies that protect the watershed. I encourage everybody to check that out at hrwc.org. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Daniel, thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments. And we're going to move now into the Q&A portion of our program. So this is when you get to ask your questions. So as a reminder, you can submit your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you haven't already. And if you're tuning in via Facebook Live, please submit your questions in the comments section. Before we head into the questions from the audience, though, we have a few questions we'd like to play via video that were submitted by members of Moms Clean Air Force, and they're specifically for Congresswoman Slotkin.
Michigan is home for the big three. More car companies are going 100% electric by 2030. How are you supporting this announcement and the goal to electrify vehicles and trucks that would help protect children from dangerous tailpipe emissions? Thank you.
Well, I think, this is what I was sort of getting at before in my opening comments, that we can build the best, coolest electric vehicles in the world, but if we do not have the infrastructure that allows them to drive country to, coast to coast, up north, down south, if we can't use our vehicles the way that Americans are used to using their vehicles, they're just not going to buy electric. And so the infrastructure package that we're talking about right now, it is kind of profound, the amount of investment that's going to go on electric vehicles. I personally want to see, like, that first time we can drive all the way across country just on, charging stations. And I think that's going to be an interesting and exciting moment. But the other thing is battery technology. We know that, we've come a long way on batteries, but we have a long way to go. And research and development on batteries is going to help us get off of those fossil fuels, turn away from the combustion engine for those who want to do it. So that tailpipe emissions are directly connected to having the infrastructure for electric vehicles.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that response. We have one more question from Moms Clean Air Force, and then we're going to go to the audience. So I think we have one more pre-recorded question.
Hi, Congresswoman. My name is Oscar, and I am 10 years old, and I live in Brighton, Michigan. Climate change makes air pollution worse, and air pollution makes my asthma worse. On hot summer days, it can be hard for me to breathe, and sometimes it's not safe for me to play outside. What are you doing in Congress to help kids with asthma like me? Thank you.
Well, and I have to admire his t-shirt, by the way, if you saw his two clean lungs on his t-shirt. So again, in addition to getting us off of fossil fuels that we use for our vehicles, it's turning, frankly, our entire grid into a greener, healthier electricity production grid. So this is where we're talking about the investments in solar, in wind, in just alternative and cleaner energies, because it's the industrial sector that uses those fossil fuels that puts those fumes in the air. So we got to wean them off and give them a better alternative, a reasonable, cheaper alternative that's good for business. So the bill that we're about to vote on here in the next month is really, really profound in the investment it makes in green energy, which is what we're talking about. And then I would say, to a lesser extent, it's a climate change issue, less of a sort of daily asthma issue, is helping our farmers and making sure that they continue to have a livelihood while also being encouraged and incentivized to turn to greener production. We had the Secretary of Agriculture out in Ingham County a month ago. And, I like the idea of basically paying farmers to do the right thing and converting and making that investment in greener agricultural technology. So it's basically looking at the biggest places where pollution is emanating from and kind of getting at that problem set by providing and incentivizing alternatives.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Moms Clean Air Force for submitting those 2 questions. It's always great to hear directly from young people in particular, and having them engaged in this kind of conversation. So we have questions coming in from the audience. So thank you. I want to pose one question that was submitted from Abby, and I think this goes to both Congresswoman Slotkin and perhaps to Daniel. It's in relationship to PFAS in particular. Chemicals that seem to be everywhere. They're popping up in our drinking water, they're in firefighting foam, and in so many products. What do we need to prioritize to stop the worst ways of being exposed to PFAS? And why has it been so tough to regulate and eliminate these chemicals?
Yeah, so Michigan is literally the state with the highest number of PFAS contamination sites in the country. Now, that is because we are looking harder than any state in the country for PFAS contamination. And that's because of our history with Flint, right? Every single Michigander became sort of aware and awake about, the issues of drinking water because of what happened in Flint. And we started looking at this chemical, and we started looking at it in our own drinking water and finding it, including in my own community here in Holly. And the most important thing we can do on PFAS, the base issue that would be such an important change from what we had now, is if we have a true science-based federal standard for what is safe and what is not safe on PFAS levels. Right now, we don't have that. We have a federal standard that's not really connected to science. We have scientists in Michigan who are telling us that the safety rates are much smaller amounts in our water systems than we thought. But because we don't have one single standard, it's really hard to get groups like the US military to clean up the areas around their contamination sites, because they say, to what standard? To the state standard, to the federal standard, to our standards. So we need the EPA to come up and just lay down the law with a strict, clear federal standard that's based on science. And we should all be urging them to do that. Certainly I am. In the meantime, we need to stop the continued contamination. We know that there are certain places, certain manufacturing facilities, certain military bases, certain places that use a lot of that PFAS-laden foam. So we need to get to the source. And then we need to invest in scientific research to help us understand how to clean this stuff up, whether it's in our water or it's in our soil. We are really in the vanguard here in Michigan. Our scientists are really on the front lines of figuring this out, because we are the ones sort of focused on it more than anyone in the country. But we got to keep at it, because we don't have perfect information about how we clean this stuff up. So the first order business is get the EPA to put down a real federal standard, and a lot of things flow from that.
And Daniel, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. The federal standard, like the Congresswoman said, that's where it all starts. We have good starting point for protections in Michigan. Abby, to your question specifically about why these things seem to be everywhere, why has it been so hard? One thing that has emerged as we've been looking at this crisis is that there are thousands of these PFAS chemicals. They are a family of chemicals. PFAS is a plural. And what we're seeing now is that as states pass regulations regarding one chemical or another. Manufacturers create a new chemical that oftentimes has very similar health impacts, and they put that one in production. So it's regrettable replacement. So the solution to that is to really do this, what they call a class-based protection, which is a total limit of all PFAS chemicals in a family up to a certain amount. And that really is the only way that over the long term we'll avoid this constant regulatory process and really this game of regulatory whack-a-mole to address PFAS contamination. But it all starts with that federal standard.
Great. And I want to just make a note on this particular issue that there are a number of questions that are coming in, and Susan in particular just wanted to recognize your leadership, Congresswoman Slotkin, specifically with your focus on the Department of Defense and holding the DoD accountable for places like Wordsmith Air Force Base and other places where there's just immense contamination as it pertains to PFAS. So a thank you on that front for sure. We could spend the whole time talking about PFAS, but I want to make sure we cover some other issues here. There's a question from Detroit Action that came in via Facebook, and it's a really important one given what's happening right now or happened last week with the flooding. As Detroit continues to face water infrastructure issues, what kind of relief is there for homeowners and renters who are facing damages from the floods and other climate change incidents?
Yeah, so I'll start, and then if folks want to jump in. So we actually had, I'm on the Homeland Security Committee, and we had the head of FEMA into our committee last week for a hearing. The floods had just happened. I mean, they were like 1 or 2 days gone, and we were already asking the FEMA director, so what are we going to do? We're going to be asking, our governor has now asked for federal emergency assistance. And we know that there has been, a lot of complaints about how slow the process is for homeowners to apply, to know how to apply for that assistance, and then to actually receive it. The one thing that we were able to secure from the head of FEMA in particular is that she committed to putting boots on the ground, not just using an internet portal, so that if there are residents in Detroit who need to file a claim, but they're not great with the internet, they don't know where to go, they don't have the internet, there's going to be FEMA representatives on the ground as soon as we hear officially on the making it a federal disaster. That announcement, I'm assuming, is going to be coming within the next week. And I would note that we have Vice President Kamala Harris coming to Detroit next week. She has rescheduled her visit. She was scheduled to come literally the day after the floods. And she's coming both to Detroit and to Flint. And I have no doubt that she is going to come with confirmation that we will declare Detroit a federal emergency disaster qualified community. And there'll be a whole effort to get people to apply for money for compensation back for the damages that we know so many have.
Thank you. And this is a really tough time for so many people. I will say on a personal note, I drove into Detroit on Saturday morning, the 26th at 7:30 in the morning on a pre-planned trip with my son. And it was like driving into the aftermath of a hurricane. I had never seen anything like it. And so I'm sure everyone's seen the photos. If they haven't experienced it firsthand, they've seen the photos, what happened. And this is a perfect time to switch our focus to price, because I mean, we're talking about water infrastructure, we're talking about plumbers and pipe fitters, we're talking about the need to actually address, this crumbling infrastructure that we have in Michigan. And best about what that really looks like. And so we've had a couple different questions come in. One is in regards to President Biden, who's called for the passage of the PRO Act, which passed the House earlier this year. This leveling of the playing field for workers goes hand in hand with the president's priorities in creating good jobs and rebuilding our infrastructure. What opportunities are there for workers in this transition? I'll say the question is about renewable energy, but I think it's about water too. So that's the first question. I'll go to the second one in a minute.
Sure. Well, there's a lot there to cover, but certainly, we're supportive of the PRO Act. I believe Congresswoman Slotkin was supportive of it, and thank you for that. And that certainly does level the playing field. And to basically cover the question, yeah, there are certainly endless opportunities, not just to promote our, the latest and greatest technologies that will protect our environment moving forward, but obviously create a lot of great jobs. And I think they go hand in hand. And that's been proven in the past when we've done investments. And I don't think anything we've done, at least in my lifetime, compares to this. And so we're looking very much forward to the opportunity of creating good paying jobs that allow people to live with a little bit of dignity in Michigan, while at the same time we're doing the right thing for our environment.
Yeah, so there was a follow-up question, Price, and an anonymous request came in asking if you could please just repeat your 4 legislative priorities on behalf of UA.
Sure. So the first one I covered was just simply the Davis-Bacon wage requirements, pretty standard in most federal projects. And we just want to make sure that that is a part of this legislation as well in the final product when it moves forward. Local hiring language that would give preference to a local workforce to make sure the folks in the community in which the work is being done. We would do everything possible where it makes sense to make sure those people get jobs in their own community. We also think it's important, especially in this day and age in Michigan, we hear so much about apprenticeship programs. We think it's valuable that the federal government would recognize and give value to DOL registered apprenticeship programs. Those are basically across the board with all the building trades. And then the last thing that kind of goes hand in hand with the local hiring language is simply some responsible contractor language, which that's probably a little bit too in-depth to get into, but it basically just props up the good employers, whether they're union or not, quite frankly. There's all types of good contractors out there. We just want to promote the folks that are doing the right thing for their employees and make sure that people in their own community get those jobs and that they make a wage that allows them to live with some dignity and retire with dignity and go from there.
Thank you. Appreciate you repeating those for us. I want to just make a quick side note and say we're getting a ton of questions, and I'm really sorry we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we'll do our best to cover as many of these, the topics at hand. I want to get to a question here that has come in a lot of different forms, and it's a question about the bipartisan infrastructure framework. It includes a lot of different water and energy investments, but that climate experts are saying falls short of what's needed to truly tackle the climate crisis. Understanding that there are a lot of bills out there and that you need to see text of any new bills, should Congress be considering climate and clean air policies or bills that deserve consideration outside of the bipartisan framework? So I think this probably goes to our Congresswoman.
Of course. It's true that there are a number of provisions that were not captured in the bipartisan deal that the president announced, I want to say 2 weeks ago now. But that does not preclude having any standalone legislation come through the Congress. It doesn't preclude a future deal. It doesn't preclude anything. And I think that's the thing that we just have to kind of keep in mind is I think that we will have this large infrastructure package that we're aiming to do before August recess, but there is still plenty of opportunities and plenty of vehicles for us to push this extremely important legislation. We haven't seen any text, as Lisa mentioned too, like we're all having this conversation about these bills, but actually none of us have actually read the text, and some of us still read the text of the bills that we vote on. So we're looking forward to getting a draft and pairing through it. And a lot can happen in 4 or 5 weeks. A lot of things can go in, a lot of things can come out. So it's not a done deal by any means. The devil's in the details on a lot of these things, but that does not mean that a standalone package, a standalone bill could not move through. And I think there'd be a lot of support for some of those key environmental provisions.
Great. We live in a society that likes a quick fix, right? I mean, it's so true in so many different ways. And so there are a lot of questions here about the importance of building resiliency into the infrastructure bills. And if the federal government is going to spend money on roads and bridges and storm sewers and culverts and transportation, it should be able to accommodate the risk of future severe weather and flooding. Is that going to be part of what is adopted? What's your perspective on that, Congresswoman?
Yeah, so I have the same perspective on this for the infrastructure bill as I did on the COVID bill that we passed back in March, which is You know, we all know in Michigan that we patch a road, or we fix something, but we never built into the cost of that road, the maintenance, the upgrades, the occasional crisis that happens on that road. We never build into the cost the long-term maintenance and resilience of that road. And then we pay more. It's just kind of basic economics. We pay more to patch, we pay more to fix it, we pay more later on. So we tried to write the legislation back in March that still hasn't been released out of Lansing yet, but is going to be a profound amount of money into the state of Michigan. We wrote it so that local governments can not only pay for that new bridge, that new road, that new broadband, but the maintenance of it and the resilience of that system. So I assume we will do the same thing for the infrastructure package once I see the text. But here's where we need to advocate with our local governments, right? Michigan has local control. Our local governments are going to be administering these federal dollars. And the citizens really need to push on those local communities to say, what's the plan? How are you going to build in resilience? How are you going to build in long-term maintenance? How are you going to make sure you can pay for this, not just now, but in 5 years and 10 years for the upkeep of it? Good, responsible, fiscally responsible citizens should be asking those really, poignant questions to their local governments as this money comes in.
So this is a question. I think we have maybe time for one or two more before we end this program. But I'll say, starting from a personal perspective, I live in a wonderful little neighborhood where people have put in a lot of rain gardens, myself included. And when the storms hit this last week, and it's prior storms too, the houses that had those rain gardens actually didn't get flooded in their basements. And so I know there's a lot of conversation taking place at the local level, to your point, Congresswoman, about what can local communities do. But the question here, I think it's to Daniel, and I think it might also be to you. I mean, it's to any of our panelists actually who want to answer this, but that water infrastructure would be an excellent way to also increase pollinator populations, because that's what's happening. It's not only preventing the flooding, right, but it's actually bringing all sorts of wonderful pollinators to our neighborhoods. By incorporating rain gardens on a massive scale, is Congress prepared to promote and fund additional ways to intentionally and widely restore and protect wildlife habitat as part of responding to climate change?
So I'll start, and then Daniel, if others want to hop in. So our job at the federal level is to try and write legislation and appropriate money in a broad way that allows local communities to do with it what is best for their local community. It is not to be prescriptive and say every citizen shall have a rain garden. It's to say, if you want to spend these federal incentive dollars on things like a rain garden, you're good to go, and we're not going to restrict you doing that with federal dollars. So I think the responsibility, for me as a legislator, is to hear from the local communities, what kind of creative ideas do you want to use, and make sure I don't rule that out in the way that I write the legislation. That's what we've tried to do, but I'm open to suggestion. If there's other things that we can be doing to incentivize things, there are a lot of people who care about pollinators in the state of Michigan, who care about keeping our local animal and wildlife habitats, who want our local flora and fauna to survive. If there's something that we can be doing to incentivize that at the federal level, please reach out to us and let us know.
Great. I want to ask one last question, and it's a biggie. And then I think we're going to have to say thank you and close the program. This is a question that's coming from Barry of the People's Water Board. And I wish Jim Nash were with us, because I think he could help answer this question, but I think maybe a number of our panelists can jump in. Over the last month or so, the People's Water Board Coalition has been calling cities and townships in Oakland and Macomb counties to inquire as to whether or not they plan to shut off water or add residents' overdue water bills to their property taxes for bills incurred during COVID. And in the course of each call, it was mentioned that the ARPA and money and CERA money that would be arriving soon, and a significant number of local governments were unaware that this money would be coming, and some chose to ignore it and instituted water shutoffs again anyway. Hazel Park has actually shut off water to some residents. Roseville and Oak Park have or are threatening to. And so the question is, what can be done to ensure that all local utilities are aware that the funds will soon be available to pay for arrears due to COVID. There seems to be a breakdown in communication somewhere. And what can we do? How do we make that connection happen?
That I find that fascinating. But if that disconnect is happening, what is hard for me to understand is the kind of money that was approved in the COVID package back in March, like the previous 4 that were approved during the Trump administration. I mean, if you're a local official, this is such a significant influx of support for the things you've been spending money on that I just assumed that folks were all keenly aware. And I know that in the 8th district, we have these regular Zoom calls and conference calls with all our local leaders talking about, here's what the money is coming for. Here's what you can spend it on. Here's what you can't spend it on. Now, the truth is the money that we approved back in March, not a dollar of it has hit our local governments. So I don't want to say it's just the local government issue that's the problem. Lansing, I have to be honest, our state government left for the summer without coming up with a spending plan for those federal dollars. And let's be clear, that's $10 billion of federal funds that is sitting in Lansing right now, waiting for a plan, waiting for folks to tell them how it can be spent and where it's going to be sent. So it sounds like your local officials need to connect with their state and federal officials pronto to get the straight facts, but also we need our legislature in Lansing, first thing they do when they get back. I wouldn't even mind if they came back from vacation, just to do a quick vote so that we can get that money out the door. Everyone has a responsibility to move quickly. We tried to do that and moved in a bipartisan way this past year, 5 different times under 2 different presidents. And I would have hoped that our legislature would have used the same vigor with which they come up with a spending plan.
So I think this concludes our program. I want to thank our esteemed guests so much. Congresswoman Price, Daniel, we could have spoken to you for hours, and I hope we'll have another chance to do just that. You are a font of information and knowledge, and I'm sure all of the viewers really benefited in so many ways from this conversation. I want to thank all of you who also tuned in tonight for your thoughtful and important questions. You made the program really vital and I think, again, very informative. And as we come to the conclusion of this program, I'd like to open a poll. For those of you tuning in, you'll see something pop up on your screen. We're ramping up recruitment of volunteers for our water and climate and democracy work, and we'll be using Zoom to engage and train new volunteers. And so if you're interested at all, please respond with a yes to the poll, and one of our organizers will follow up with you in the next couple days, I promise. So we have a real transformational opportunity to recover and rebuild from COVID-19 and to be stronger than ever while taking action on climate change and ensuring that all communities have clean air to breathe and safe water to drink. We've heard a lot about that this evening. We'll be talking a lot more about it in the days ahead. I thank you all for joining us this evening. Be safe, be well, and we will see you next time. Take good care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.